At Allegion, we're on the cutting edge of connectivity on a global basis. We've never lived in a time where we're moving at light speed in terms of how devices help connect our lives and help manage our lives. We're making significant investments to make our products more connected, and we rely on the vision of Rob Martens to help set that path so that we have cutting-edge technologies to help support our customers anywhere they're at in the world.
Thank you. Well, as my Southern grandmother would say, you are quite a vision. So you all look fabulous. I like to start all of my presentations by saying that. But welcome. Thank you for coming. It really is great to see so many familiar faces and friends and, frankly, industry leaders in the audience. Before we jump into the IoT or Internet of Things, just want to case it for a second. So the reason we're here, one of the core values that we have, is we're all passionate about the security and safety of our families, our friends, and our communities. And what the IoT represents is an evolution of our industry. And so it's imperative as leaders in this space, and family members and friends and community members, to understand and embrace these new technologies. That's not to say that they're going to appear tomorrow, maybe not even the next day, but it's really important that the people who are the true experts within physical security are involved. So I am a futurist. And so my definition of what a futurist is that I identify trends, technology, different processes, interesting things that are coming forward that can affect us. Now, the name futurist has many other connotations. So I'm sure some of you have other words. You make stuff up, right? My favorite one is crystal ball gazer. But so I'll have to let you judge at the end of my presentation which category I fit into, okay? Just don't throw anything at me. So to get started, I want to tell you a little bit about myself and where I'm coming from so you can understand the lens through which I look at all these future trends and technologies. So the first thing you should know about me is I am the product of a scientist and a poet. So I got that left brain, right brain thing going on big time. So as other people would state it, Rob's got the data and the drama. So if you've worked with me before, you already know this in spades. So when most kids were getting their first jobs and they were mowing yards or perhaps bagging groceries, I was actually working in a physical oceanography lab. And what I was doing was I was part of a team that was building deep ocean sensors. These are things where it would measure salinity, temperature of the water, positioning. We drop them off a side of ships into the ocean, and then airplanes would fly over, collect the data, and then report it up. And what's really interesting is those scientists could then tell you what was going on in the atmosphere above the planet. Okay, I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but you can say, well, that was probably a pretty early form of IoT. So I got my exposure to applied technology very early. Jumping ahead pretty far, I was getting dropped off at school, at university. So I'm a Tar Heel, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, represent. My parents said something very profound to me, and at the time I didn't really care because I was ready to get away from home and get into the dorm and start my, my college career. But they said, Rob, remember this, you go to school to learn how to learn, not to learn a skill. And for someone who is curious beyond the obvious, this was very sage advice. So what that encouraged me to do is I explored. I explored from a very early age all the way through college. I took it to the end. And now in a more related world, that's a big value. Everything's tying together. So I graduated. I participated in a very successful startup. We flipped. I went into the automotive industry. I was a raw materials buyer, became a purchasing agent. I even went into marketing. But I didn't really hit my stride. I didn't really find my calling until actually I joined a bank, of all things. What was fascinating is that financial institution was in the midst of a massive change. They were reinventing themselves. They had been grandfathered in to sell non-traditional banking products and services, and they were using technology to get them there. All kinds of interesting things going on. As I moved from area to area within the bank, I got exposed to any number of Big Four consultancies, all of which we're probably familiar with, and eventually got lured by one of them to get more global experience, which I did. I joined them, I traveled the globe, but the big benefit wasn't just the travel. I was exposed to consumer products. I was exposed to diversified industrials. I got a great education, and ultimately, I landed at a diversified industrial company. It's a fantastic job. I became the corporate IT strategist. This is where I got my first exposure to the security industry. We had all kinds of different products and services, everything from HVAC, we sold golf cars, all kinds of different stuff. But the area that I found the most fascinating and most interesting was security and safety. Why? It was the most dynamic space. It was the most important space in my mind. It was the space where people demonstrated the most passion and expertise about what they did. This was real. It was tangible stuff. I loved it. Well, at that point, I got the visit from HR. Rob, you need to follow this path or this path. There is no middle path. So I followed the path that I thought I was supposed to follow. So I decided, well, I'll go on the CIO path. So I followed the CIO path, and luckily for me, I wound up as the CIO for that sector within that diversified industrial in security and safety. I became an IT guy, though. I got exposed to all kinds of things, all these interesting things that I really, really wanted to do, but what I found myself doing was ERP. Package software. So ERP, for those of you who aren't familiar, Oracle, SAP, all these words that many of us kind of get like a shiver down our spine when we think about them. But so I kept following in that path and eventually found myself taking a corporate CIO role for a specialty steel company. And again, what did I do? ERP, package software, pretty boring. I was fortunate in my choice. Myself and a couple of other executives wound up getting a very beneficial circumstance, and I actually retired from the company. I decided, well, I want to explore something completely different. That is actually spending time with my kids and my family, for one. But second of all, I was determined to become handy, because I was tired of Carolyn, my wife, saying, Rob, you change a light bulb, that's about it. So anyway, I learned how to put on a 24-gauge metal roof. I learned how to do carpentry, but in interest of full disclosure, I'm still horrible with electrical and plumbing. I don't go there. So I woke up one morning, about 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning. My wife's standing over me, Carolyn's sitting there, and she looks at me and she says, so, what are we going to do today? So I knew immediately whatever came out of her mouth next, that would be what I was going to be doing. So that was my cue to get out of her house and to get back to work. And so I consulted. I worked with a number of brands and products that I guarantee you'd be familiar with. Big, diverse stuff. But I was on an airplane again. I was spoiled being around my kids. I have 3 of them, Gray, Laura, and Jane. Fantastic experience staying home with them for a little while. And so I said, okay, let's go back down the traditional path again. So I did. I let the headhunters know that, hey, I'm back. And so started getting the usual calls for CIO jobs. Hey, would you want to be a CIO in here? You've got automotive experience. You got this, you got that. Kind of just nothing was really turning me on. And then I got a call from Allegion. And Allegion had just been spun off from the diversified industrial that I'd been part of. And so I was psyched. This was where I wanted to be. This was the exciting stuff. And quite frankly, even if they'd asked me to do some IT stuff, I probably still would have done it. But they had something completely different in mind for me. So what's probably unique about my perspective is I refer to myself as a recovering CIO. And the reason why I call it that is, in order to really grasp this space, the Internet of Things space, and everything we're talking about, you kind of have to unlearn a lot of what you learned, forcing, prepackaged software down people's throats. But one of the big ads that I had was, the CIO happens for many of you in the room to be the new decision maker. And who better to ask than someone who is just in that chair about what their concerns are, what they understand, what they don't understand, and how do we propagate and proliferate these new solutions with this new buyer and, quite frankly, a frustrated, more experienced facility manager. So, diving in a little bit, what is the Internet of Things? So, for those of you who don't know, the phrase Internet of Things was actually coined by a guy named Kevin Ashton, a British tech pioneer, in 1999. Okay, so it's been around for a little while. But what the premise of the IoT is that billions of devices will be connected to each other and communicate and share things in such a way that we all benefit. And we're going to take some time and dive into that in a little bit more detail today. Now, I want to point something out. We are unique in this space. Security and safety is one of the few mission critical. I can think of a couple others. I'd say smart grid's probably pretty mission critical too. But ours is unusual. The smart grid turns off, yeah, some things stop working. The security system must work all the time, every time. No exceptions. And we all know that, and we're all passionate about that. So, what's generating all of this excitement? What's pushing this thing? We see it in the press constantly. So the numbers are pretty eye-popping. And depending on your view, we'll see anything from 50 to 200. So take these with a grain of salt. But even if you cut some of the numbers a little bit, they're just staggering. So 100 to 200 billion connected devices. That equates to approximately 26 smart devices per person. Now, if you think about it, today you might say, no way do I have 26 connected devices. But if you really go through what you have, because I had the same reaction, I'll bet a bunch of you in the room are pretty close. The money slide, right? $14 trillion in revenue. Now, you can argue this. You could say, hey, that's a crazy number. Maybe it is, but cut it in a third, and let me ask you, is that still a compelling number to you? That gets some serious attention. So let's talk about the core of IoT for a second. IoT is based on some computing principles. One of the most important ones are associated with ambient intelligence. So what is ambient intelligence? Well, ambient intelligence are systems that are focused more on people and their experience. So these are the things that the sensors do for you. So for a second, let's talk about those things. So there are different types of sensors. So I want to talk about 5 types today. So there's embedded, where you have a number of network sensors together that are contributing to whatever experience you're having. There's context aware, where some of these are self-explanatory, right? It understands you in the context that you are actually in. Personalized, where you have the choice. You can set this sensor to do something for you the way that you want it. Adaptive, so, hey, gosh, Rob's got this jacket on, it's kind of hot in here, his body temperature is here, let's turn the temperature down. So it's adapting to me. And then also anticipatory, okay? It's this time at night, I'm going to turn the lights on in anticipation of whatever event. So what's important isn't necessarily these individual categories. What's important is what happens when you put them together. So when you put these together, what it affords you is a potential boon in personalized experience. And what I would tell you is this is the upcoming expectation that, for example, the millennials have. So let's talk for a second about current IoT categories, because this is a dramatic, dynamic space. Things are changing constantly, but if you want to talk intelligently about it today, you can talk about it in 5 distinct categories. So first, many of us are familiar with connected home. So when we talk about connected home, we can talk about connected thermostats, lighting, and of course, smart locking solutions, etc. Smart car, smart auto, we've seen a lot of this. That goes from everything is using that automobile as the dashboard to control things all the way through to intelligent vehicles that drive themselves. Wearable technologies. So I see a lot of people around with fitness bands. And obviously there was a big announcement here recently, some fruit company about some watch, which is a big deal, I guess, right? The industrial internet, which think about in terms of manufacturing, the robotics, everything that they use is in a much more connected fashion than it ever has been before. And then ultimately, you've seen tons of commercials about this. They'll call it smart cities, smart grid, all these different things, but it's more or less an energy play, but also you could call it a community IoT category. So what's driving this really? Well, the only way I know how to track something realistically is by following the money. So following the money is pretty easy to do in this space. So let's talk about this. So from beginning in 2010, sensor costs are down by 50% since 2010. Bandwidth is down by 40x, 40 times less expensive for bandwidth. Processing, down by 60x. So let me get this straight. So we have sensors that are inexpensive and creating all of this data. We have bandwidth, which you can think of as a pipe through which all that data is going to flow. And then you have processing, which is the way that we can turn dysfunctional data into usable, clean, beneficial information that we can all use and share to the advantage of our client, our consumer, our end user. So let me give you a tangible example of this kind of evolution within the space. So don't be shy. How many of you have worked with or remember using mainframes? Good number of us, right? So the mainframe was the standard. Big iron, right? Big iron had some real advantages, but also had some real disadvantages. It was stable, but it was expensive. Sometimes you had to schedule time in order to get time with the mainframe computer, right? Lots of cost, and heaven forbid something happened to the building in which your mainframe was sitting, because you might not be operating that day if there was a problem, right? So it evolved. It evolved to what we call a client-server architecture, a distributed area where, hey, I'm going to give everybody a laptop, I'm going to give all of you a device, and then we're going to share some of the duties with things like print servers and other things. So we moved to a distributed network. Ultimately, this is a back to the future type of story. So we have a hybrid. So the cloud represents a situation where we each have our individual devices, but it's ubiquitous computing. Can be from anywhere. The mainframe-like functionality is no longer in one data center. It's propagated all over the place. So heaven forbid that we have, an earthquake or some other event. Chances are, if your provider's doing the right thing, your data's safe, you're going to be able to continue operations, and we go. But you can see how the evolution is taking place and contributing to this low cost. So low cost plus very high quality data and the inclusion of things like analytics, all kinds of business intelligence, the ability to manipulate big data and do the right things, creates this incredible equation. So low cost, great data, oh man, opportunity city. Think about the efficiencies. Think about the new ideas. Think about the patterns in chaos that we don't see today that this is discovering on a regular basis. Things that might not be intuitive to us. Okay? So it's not all about cost savings. It's about creativity. It's about other things. So let's talk for a second about we talked about the evolution of computing. Now let's talk about the evolution of the internet itself. So the first wave of the internet from the 1990s involved about 1 billion users, and they were connected by desktop computers, right? We all did it. It was awesome. This was incredible. What a change. Well, in the early 2000s, we added another billion users with mobile computing. Everybody's got their phone, they got their tablet, we've got all our things. Now, with the Internet of Things, what we're seeing is an insane exponential rise. And why is this so relevant? Well, this is relevant because these smart devices no longer require humans to input data to the Internet. These devices are able to communicate at their pace, at their time, and put relevant, clean information out there for us. So we refer to, and I refer to, the IoT, the Internet of Things, as the third wave of the Internet, Web 3.0. We finished our primer for what the basics of IoT are. So let's talk about physical security, the reason you're really here. You're an architect, let's say. What is your thought process today as an architect? I guarantee you, you're saying, I like all this new technology, but I'm not going to be the beta site for this stuff, right? But what they're also saying is, I do want my designs to embrace technology. I know that I'm being judged on the total sum experience that I'm providing for that end user. So I don't want to be behind the times, but I don't want to get, put out in the cold either. So where do I fit in if I'm a security consultant, if I am a integrator, if I'm a software provider, a system provider? Where do I fit into this? And quite candidly, do I even want to play in this space? Well, the interesting thing is I would tell you, as much as you may or may not want to play, I guarantee you will, because people will come in to try and disrupt that space if you don't. So let's go to the decision makers for a second here. Just for fun, let's call our facility manager Lyle. So Lyle is a 30-year veteran. He gets hardware cold. He knows how that building works. He knows the ins and outs. He gets it. An industry veteran who knows what he's doing. And then let's talk about the new sheriff in town, Scott. Scott, the new CIO. Well, what does Scott know? Scott knows ERP. So Lyle thinks encryption is some funeral burial option that you buy. Scott thinks that egress is some kind of waterfowl from Florida, right? The bottom line, though, is Scott, as your decision maker, is having some issues. He's saying, oh my gosh, I have got so much on my plate. I'm trying to get this ERP thing done. I'm worried about my staff. My guys are, leaving, and I'm not able to replace them quickly enough. I'm a little bit distracted with that. I've got this data management strategy. I've got identity management going on. There are all these things. I don't really know anything about physical security, so I'm really happy to have the budget. I wonder if I can skim off the top of that budget and maybe use it for some other things that are really important that I know. But at the end of the day, one of the most important things you need to know about Scott is he's saying, I need a win. You see, the average lifespan for Scott in his job is just about 2.5 years right now. In and out. Now, Lyle is wondering, who moved my cheese? Because I can tell you what, that guy over there, Scott, seems like a nice guy, but he definitely does not know how to manage a budget. He doesn't know anything about physical security. I can guarantee you that. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm really worried about the fact that I'm going to be held responsible for this no matter what. At the end of the day, they're coming to Lyle about the physical security of this building, of this campus, of this school. That puts integrators, security consultants, software providers right in the eye of the hurricane. In order for this relationship to work, you are the glue. You are the junction box through which Lyle and Scott are going to communicate. And quite frankly, the IoT is going to move at the speed of that relationship. Trusted advisor, mentor, mediator. All of these are roles that you will need to play to avoid some of the types of disruption we've seen in some other industries. Think of IoT in the sense of a symphony. Every device provider, all these people can play a certain note, and they love to play their note, believe me, we do. But in order for those notes to be put into any kind of meaningful order, we need a conductor. I suggest that conductor is you. Now, what do you get when you have all these uncoordinated notes? Well, you get dissonance. You get this awful grinding noise, nails on a chalkboard, the gears crunching, all the stuff we hate. So the key skill of the integrator, of the consultant, of the software provider is to help order these, to bring some rational thought, to bring the industry expertise to know which devices, connected or not, should go there and what order they should be in. Now, those who do it well are going to have an amazing symphony. And companies like Allegion, we're here to help. Think of us as the first seat musician. Think of us as the person who is there to help to guide. Our role and other first seat musicians' roles are to make our devices simple, easy to use, easy to integrate. Open standards, open architecture. That's what we want to be. So let's talk about this in a little bit more detail. So when you create this symphony, what you're really doing is you're addressing what Joseph Pine refers to as the experience economy. And this is not a new concept. I'm sure many of you have already heard of this. But you see the quote from him, customers are increasingly judging and buying on this sum total experience. So let me give you another tangible example. So you go to the Apple Store and you buy an iPhone. The Apple Store is a little bit different experience in and of itself. I'm not at a cash register, all those things. I take my device home. I pull the box up. I feel that kind of vacuum pull as I pull it out. I pull the device out. I feel the weight of the device. I notice the design. I notice the lines. I see these things. I find that there's no manual. It's intuitive. There's no instructions I'm supposed to follow. It's whatever I think needs to happen. I download my first app. I cruise the internet for the first time. That is an example of a holistic experience. And that, again, is what our consumer, as they're growing in our industry, is looking for. Now, breaking it down more simply, great, Rob, that's fantastic. How do you expect for us to do that? Well, if we break the IoT down in the physical security space, you can do it in three simple components. Security, which obviously many of us are biased to. So, whether it be IP cameras, connected locks and door hardware, alarm systems, etc. Energy management, HVAC, lighting systems, blinds, all the like, energy. Many of you may think of this as the former BAS, Building Automation Systems, if you've seen that before. But here's the key one, convenience. If you do the first two of these really well, and then you add in convenience to the mix, smart plugs, wearable devices, things that the consumer sees as an extension of themselves, such as their phone, that customer experience can ascend to new heights. And you can delight the customer in ways that you may have never thought of. So how's this going to happen? Well, we talk in the industry, it's typically two ways. We're either going to be retrofitting buildings or we're going to be building new ones. So in doing that, think of your customer and the opportunities. Your customer essentially has a digital force field around them, if you will. So how many of you are familiar with the term geofencing? Great. Okay, so many of you know this term. So this concept of having a spatially aware building, something that knows where you are at any given time, knows what you want, understands what's happening. This is the expectation as we go forward. These are the things that we can move in baby steps towards and plan for now, today. So let's take another example. So there was a software company that decided that they were going to build a thermostat, a very expensive thermostat. That very expensive thermostat was extremely successful at big box retailers on the residential side. And so as a reward for their efforts, they were swallowed whole by a megatech company. Now what's interesting about that is in the IoT and in the connected home space, the tide rises all ships. So what we found was if you look at the numbers and you eliminate what we'll call the sexy out of it, the numbers would tell you people still choose to buy the brand and the product from the people that are the true knowledge experts within the space. So in other words, it's fantastic to be first to market. It's fantastic to be connected. But in the case of a thermostat, if you're off by 4 degrees, that's not what the consumer wants. They're still buying it because they want a good thermostat. So first to market isn't everything. And the same thing applies to us in our industry. Just because you have a cool connected product doesn't make it the right fit, in particular when it comes into the security and safety of our family, friends, and community. So what's driving a bunch of this stuff? Well, how many of you are familiar with the term crowdfunding? Okay, a good number of you. How many of you have actually experimented with crowdfunding? Last, but that's still, okay. So the concept of crowdfunding is pretty simple. An entrepreneur puts an idea out on a website. They say, I want to do this, give me money for it, and I'll make it happen. Well, as many people are becoming familiar with really quick, R&D in the public space with people who've never done it before can be an ugly process. Think making sausage. Pretty ugly stuff. But the problem is once that idea gets out into the minds of our consumer, they expect it to exist. Hey, I gave you $50. Where is it? Worse yet, I gave you $1,000. Where is it? And so that's where the adults need to step forward. The adults in the industries need to make sure that they're communicating where the real potholes are, where the responsible decisions need to be made. And one of the challenges for our industry when we see crowd-funded solutions coming forward is, have they really thought through it all? In our case, we see these things in safe schools programs. We see things that are absolutely dangerous. Straight up dangerous. And so what our goal is, and our passion tells us and teaches us, however politically incorrect it may be, to call those out. So what we're seeing is a series of blurring boundaries. We see big box, office-ware retailers coming out with home automation solutions. Maybe that lasts, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But we see this, what I'll call irrational exuberance associated with the IoT. You see companies stretching into things that maybe don't make a whole lot of sense from our perspective. And I'm here to tell you, we're already starting to see that trend back to where it really should be. There's no substitute for having the knowledge that you have. You have to play, but you have to play smart. We're going to see companies close the doors. We're already seeing it. We're going to see companies swallowed. We're going to see the real leaders step forward. But the blurred boundary piece, I call it blurred boundary syndrome, is very real. So in our case, Allegion is unusual. I always describe it to our team is we sit on a teeter-totter. We're very fortunate. We're the leaders in the commercial space, and we're also leaders in the residential space. So we're witness to disruption outside of the bubble on either one. So a perfect example is keyless access. So keyless access, the interest started on the commercial side. All of us have seen the badges. You've got your Aptique credential or whatever it may be, and you get home, and at that point you're saying, God, you know, I still prefer my badge to, you know, a physical key. The residential teams take that forward. Customer, the consumer, says, I want something different. Wearables come in. Keypads are popular. All of a sudden, people say, I want to open my door with my phone. And what happens again? The teeter-totter shifts. We move to the side. All of a sudden, commercial solutions come forward with keyless access, but with a completely different device. So having that perspective is really fantastic and a real advantage. So as, you know, consultants, integrators, security providers, one of the big challenges you're going to face in this IoT space is how do you evaluate all these people that are going to be coming at you in waves with their solution? I've got this, it does that. How do you vet it out? It's a real challenge. Some of these folks have venture funding that you wouldn't believe, but again, the money isn't what drives the value ultimately. It's not the tech. It's the inherent knowledge and how to apply that technology the right way. So there's some real danger associated with these things. What I worry about is what I call a category killer. And many of you probably use the definition of category killer associated with things like Home Depot or Lowe's or Amazon, where, hey, you know, a great business went in, had this business model, and it just wiped everybody out. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is someone comes out with a solution and makes such a big mistake in the market with the consumer that they say, I'm never doing that again. Not going to happen. And so I'll give you 3 examples. The Hindenburg. I don't know about you, but I don't see too many lighter-than-air aircraft flying around. Maybe Snoopy 2 at the Masters, or the Goodyear blimp on occasion. But, you know, when you get a guy on the microphone saying, oh, the humanity, that'll pretty much do it, right? The second one I would tell you, maybe on a little lighter note, is how many of you have heard of Olestra? Yeah. FDA really did right by those guys, didn't they? Right? So multi-million-dollar investment in this food product that with some bad press in the wrong perspective, in the wrong magazines, in the wrong things, killed the category, killed it. And make no mistake, tens of millions of dollars seated in that. Last but not least, Segway, you know, the scooter company, 2 wheels and a gyroscope. Perception is reality, and when your president drives his Segway off a cliff and dies, that's going to make some press. And so ultimately, 3 examples for you of a category killer. Don't see too many Segways out there, and frankly, don't see too many non-gadgety Segway-like devices, something that was ultimately came out with a lot of hype and something that was supposed to change the world. I remember the announcement, and then they came out with it. I kind of went, that's it? So what this really boils down to from the seat you're sitting in is it's the advice your parents gave you all those years ago. Pick your friends carefully in this space. It's really cliche, but you're only as strong as your weakest link, especially in the Internet of Things. People who are good at software are good at software. It doesn't make them hardware experts, and vice versa to a degree, but understand what your exposure is, and understand that as you're selecting how you're going to deliver this more personalized experience to everyone. There's going to continue to be salacious, sexy news about data breaches and other things. I mean, we've all heard about Target, Neiman Marcus, State of New York. you name it. We're going to continue to see report after report about these things. But make no mistake, if your idea with that is to say, it's not ready, it's not coming, because the consumer's not going to expect it, they're not going to expose themselves to that, you're wrong. Because it's coming. Okay? And the reason why is the consumer demands it. That's why the IoT has an unknown ceiling right now. That's why the venture capital community is investing at the levels that they are. And that's why we, as the responsible stewards of the security and safety industry, need to be diligent about what's happening in our space. So, we've talked about a lot of things: basic education, bandwidth, sensors, equations, connected cars, all the fantastic things that are coming. But again, every time, all the time, no exception. That being said, we think the symphony is coming. We think the symphony is going to be led by the people in this room. We think you're the glue. We think you're the junction box. We think this is how the IoT is going to happen. It's going to be organic. It's not going to be easy to control, but it's going to be led by people who understand our industry. And we're here to help. And hopefully today's session was a good basic understanding of the roots of the IoT. And we look forward to working with you on integrating smart new devices, gradually bringing people forward, keeping change management in mind on how this can be adopted responsibly, the right way, so we don't expose our friends and family and community to unforeseen dangers. So with that, I thank you, and I'd like to end my formal presentation. If you want to talk shop, talk about where you're going with your solutions or how Allegion can assist you in some way, shape, or form, I am at your service. Thank you very much.